American English, American English. Teach and learn American English.
Welcome to Teaching Tips from American English. In Part 2 of this teaching tip topic, Andrew Screen will examine how to flip your classroom while also providing some examples of how he flips his own classroom. Welcome back, Andrew.
Welcome to Part 2 of the Flipped Classroom, How to Flip. My name's Andrew. Let's get started. In Part 1, I talked about what flipping is and why teachers flip. Be sure to click here if you missed it. Let's take a look at today's goals. Today I'll show you how to flip your classroom, or at least parts of your classroom, and give you specific examples of how I flip my own classroom. Let's get started. What's a flip? Let's think of the instruction piece happening outside class. This can mean reading content or watching videos. Then, since the instructional time has been removed from class, that creates more time for students to simply check answers with a partner or actually practice inside class, for example. Practice might mean engaging in tasks, which enable students to interact with the language, and one primary purpose is to create more in-class time so that students can use the language. To give an example of what that might look like, students could read about new content or watch a video about a new structure before the teacher explains it in class. I put new and explains in quotation marks because there's a good chance that the first time that you explain something to students, it might not be new to students, at least not all students. Again, the reading or watching is done for homework so that students can be prepared to engage with the language in class. What does that actually look like? Here's a sample of something I've done in my grammar classes. Rather than teaching my students what the passive voice is in class without preparation, I simply expose them to it through video before our first class on passive. I was born in Virginia. In other words, my mother bore me in Virginia. Sounds pretty funny, doesn't it? That's because the verb bear, the past tense is bore, and the past participle is born. Just like for the verb wear. We've got wear, wore, and worn. And the same thing is true for the verb tear. Tear, tore, torn. So you can see a pattern happening. So what did I do here? Yeah, I tore the paper. So just to review, with these three verbs you can see a clear pattern. Bear, bore, born, wear, wore, worn, tear, tore, torn. So why am I talking about these verbs? Well, it goes back to my original statement. I was born in Virginia. Telling people where or when you were born is a passive statement. You're using the passive when you do that. That's one of the very first things you learn in English. So you actually are speaking in the passive, using passive, right at the beginning of learning English. Okay, so now that our students have some background on the passive voice, we can actually move much more efficiently on day one of the unit in class. They saw the content before class. Now you as the teacher can quiz students to check their comprehension first thing in class. This also motivates them to be on time. You can quiz them with clickers, smartphone polling options, or simpler methods. So let's say, for example, that more than 30% of the class answers a question incorrectly. You can use that as a teachable moment. Have students discuss their answers in pairs or small groups, and don't only have them share their answer, but challenge them to convince their partners why they are right. This is often difficult for students, but it forces them to support their choice with grammar logic and articulate this to a classmate. What a great way to solidify learning. Then the teacher provides feedback, and students can respond to the question again. Hopefully, the students with the correct answer were the more persuasive ones. Here's an example of how I would check student comprehension of the video on passive, which we saw earlier in this video. The comprehension quiz can be very short and simple. In fact, in my experience, it should be, so that students have more time to practice. This is simply an incentive to encourage students to do what they already should be doing, and at the same time, to make sure that they are coming to class with the necessary information to engage with the material. Now that we've addressed day one of a new unit, what happens after that? If you're teaching a 4-day unit, days 2, 3, and 4 can then be used for more practice, such as writing, role plays, or mock interviews, for example. Again, because this is what we actually want our students to be doing with the language, we want them to practice in class with feedback. Now, what if you're trying to flip with limited technology? If you actually have access to internet, plan ahead by downloading videos from YouTube to a thumb drive and then using them later when you don't have internet access. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of the Flipped Classroom. Go ahead and click here for part 3 of the Flipped Classroom online tools and activities.
To check out other great teaching tip videos, be sure to subscribe to our American English YouTube channel. You can find resources for teachers on the American English website by clicking on the link listed here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like us on the American English for Educators Facebook page.